We're living in a moment. In my entire life, I've never seen or experienced anything like we are today. And I think it started with a hunkered down mindset. If we can just get through the next couple months, everything will go back to normal. But that's not what happened. In fact, I was talking to a senior leader of a healthcare system not long ago, and I made the statement that we're not going back to normal. We'll go to a next normal, and then we'll end up in a new normal. And he said, "What do you mean by that?" And I laughed and said, "Honestly, I don't know, because I think it's going to be different for each one of us." So I remember back in March when this COVID thing really kind of was first happening, and travel was being canceled, and people were kind of moving to a new thing. Companies were canceling events, and I went off the road and I made a list on the flight home. My consulting business, I decided, okay, let's not waste a crisis. And so I made a list of all the things I was going to do that were going to be in the quiet time while we were hunkered down for 2 months. I've never pulled that list out since the first day I wrote it, because we figured out that I could do much of my work remotely through Zoom and other avenues that I would have never figured out while I was on the road 3 to 4 weeks a month, trying to figure out how to build this business. So I think we have this really unique opportunity of dealing with challenge that's coming, but rethinking the way that we do our business. And I would tell you honestly, I'm still in that process of figuring out, are we in this next normal? And when we get to the new normal, will I be doing the work I was doing before the same way, or will I come up with new ways of being more effective and more functional in the way we do that work? So I think that when we think about new normals and next normals, it's helpful to frame it and focus it in 2 very specific ways. The first frame is the external world that's happening around us, the environment that we find ourselves in. And the second way is the internal, or as I often think about, I got to deal with me as the leader. In the first frame, or the external, many of us may be facing something called VUCA. And you might be asking, well, what is VUCA? Well, VUCA is an acronym that means volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And many of you may be facing 1 or 2 or 4, all of those factors. And I believe that COVID has certainly intensified whatever you were experiencing or beginning to experience before in your environments, has certainly intensified it. The second part of what we have to deal with is us, or the 6 inches between our ears. I think as we are, many of us, experienced leaders, having lived through a few battles, and I always like the phrase, "This isn't my first rodeo." I think that we find ourselves often in a rut, and I would say ruts can be good things. I like ruts, actually. I said they're comfortable. They're a nice place to visit, but the problem is if you stay in those ruts, you miss out on tremendous opportunity, especially in a externally driven VUCA world that we're living in at the present. The second part of the dealing with me part often revolves around my own sense of fear and in being uncomfortable. Because when I'm in that rut, there's a great thing about it. It doesn't take a lot of energy to do the things we're doing. If I want to move into something new or figure out an answer to a problem that's been plaguing us, then we have this challenge of becoming uncomfortable in that space and getting lost in the amount of energy that's going to take to move us forward. I'm reminded that a number of years ago when I left the last role I was in, I decided I was going to do something new and take guitar lessons. And I've taken many years of piano lessons and play some, and I thought it would be no big deal to learn a new skill in playing guitar as it was playing the piano. But it turns out, at 50-some years old, it was really hard to rethink the way my fingers needed to perform and the way the scales were set up and the way that chords were formed as it was with the piano. And it feels awkward, it feels frustrating, and it feels embarrassing if somebody would walk in. I remember my young son at the time could pick up things, with guitar and play that were taking me 3 and 4 times as long to sort of master. So I think that's this unique challenge we have in dealing with us. But if we don't deal with us, and us as the leader, we as leaders, we have very little limited ability to now affect the external world that's around us. I want to offer you 3 ideas to lead with imagination into this time of crisis. First, embrace the idea that leadership's an adventure. And adventures are typically unusual and exciting and often hazardous activities or experiences. Get used to the idea that being uncomfortable is both okay and also a sign and indication that you're making progress. Number 2, determine to lead with love instead of fear. It can be really tempting, even in these times when there's legitimate reasons in this COVID world, to be fearful. We always have a choice, and we have to make that choice proactively. I can also attest that every time I have made my largest leadership failures have been when I have neglected to choose love in place of fear, especially fear of failure. Number 3, engage your curiosity. I think once you accept and embrace the fact that leadership is an adventure, and 2, once you've chosen to lead with love, this is rather a hack. I have a friend who's a curiosity researcher, and she uses some language that I find very helpful. One, she describes moving from a know-it-all to a learn-it-all. And the second is, instead of trying to prove myself, to improving myself. And especially if I can focus that on those that I lead and on those that we serve in our organizations, it becomes very powerful. And the last thing I just sort of challenge you with that I've discovered is that I can't somehow be angry at somebody and curious about them at the same time. And I think this time of leadership requires us to be anything above being divisive and allow us to hear and listen to others around us, as we lead them and we lead those we serve into this future. Leaders are difference makers. And in times of crisis, they're more needed than ever. So thank you for your leadership and for choosing to learn and lead with imagination.